I want to talk about the Air Max 95 today. Welcome back to the channel, everybody. As always, I'm your host, Matt Freites, and today I want to talk about the Air Max 95. I recently got this in the mail. This is the Air Max 95 Neon colorway. It just released a couple of weeks ago, and honestly, I was really excited to be able to get a pair. As I was looking at this particular shoe, I started to ask myself questions about the Air Max 95. It's Air Max month after all, and if you're doing it the way that I'm doing it, the history matters a lot to me anyway, and it should matter somewhat to you. And as I'm looking at the Air Max 95 and I'm thinking about where is its place in the history of sneakers, so often when you go on sneaker YouTube, you see videos about Jordans and you see videos about Dunks and you see videos about a whole plethora of items and a whole plethora of silhouettes and colorways, but you don't see the Air Max 95 mentioned too often. Nike has done a lot over the last year and a half to really give it a shine. Reason being, it turned 30 years old in 2025. It's hard for me to say that now at 43, but yeah, I'm that old, where a favorite shoe of mine is now 31 years old as of the recording of this video. The Air Max 95 has a very particular place in the lineage of the Air Max. Obviously, the Air Max 1 comes along, revolutionizes running shoes as we know it at the time in 1987. But by the time the 1990s come along, many things change. 1995 was a very interesting year in the history of the world. Obviously, you had the O.J. Simpson verdict, the Atlanta Braves finally breaking through and winning their first World Series. Bill Clinton was president. The world was a drastically different place. Nike's world was a drastically different place as well. If you think about Nike back in that time frame, yes, Jordans had started to take off. Nike was getting even further into basketball. They still were a running company, but what they were finding is that their running prowess and what they were known for was starting to take a back seat to basketball shoes. And so Nike decided that they needed to do something drastic. They needed to make sure that the Air Max line stayed relevant and Nike stayed relevant, not just in the basketball world, but in the running world and even in the casual footwear world. And that's where the Air Max 95 came along. Much like the Air Max 1, Nike took a risk on somebody who had already done a little something with the company, and that was Sergio Lozano. He had been working with Nike ACG. He had been working on their tennis line. Those two are now steeped in lore as well. They brought him in with one mandate: do something big, take a risk. All bets were off at this point. And when you look at the way that the Air Max 95 looks, it's hard not to see that risks were taken. Black midsoles for the first time, that gradient pattern, the bulkiness of it, not only a visible big air unit in the rear, but also in the forefoot as well. These were new elements added to the Air Max 95 that really made it pop. In some ways, the way that it looked didn't really appeal to runners, although back in the day in 1995, that's what you did. You ran with the Air Max 95. In 2026, we don't think of it that way, the same way we don't think a lot of the early Jordan models as basketball shoes. But slowly over time, culturally, the Air Max 95 started to turn the tide. People may have been hesitant at first, but after a while, they started to really grab a hold of it. And what the Air Max 95 did by cementing itself in pop culture, cementing itself on the streets, becoming a part of what is now known as sneaker culture, it got Nike away from just being a running company, just being a basketball company, and Nike was a company that kind of felt cool at that point. The Air Max 95, in my opinion, did that. And I think that it's interesting to think about where it fits, because when you think about all of the best silhouettes of all time, whether it's Nikes or Adidas or whatever, rarely does the Air Max 95 get thought of, rarely does it get mentioned. But as I'm looking at this shoe, I'm looking at how it's made, I'm thinking and putting myself in 1995. I was 12 years old in 1995, and honestly, this shoe really didn't register to me. I wasn't old enough to appreciate where we were going. I certainly wasn't old enough to afford it. But looking at it in 2026, with all of the wisdom that I have collected over the years, I now understand why this shoe has made such an impact, and I now understand why people want a piece of this history. I was very fortunate to be able to get a pair, and this is not a review of this shoe. We will do that at a later time. But I was putting together an audio episode for my audio podcast, Fire Footwear, and I was doing it about the Air Max 95. And the more that I looked into it, the more I realized that the Air Max 95 plays a huge role in where we are today. Not just the neon colorway, but there have been so many other colorways over the years that have really stood out. And if Nike is really good at doing one thing, it is leaning into its steeped history, leaning into that heritage. Maybe sometimes they lean on it a little bit too hard, but I think for the most part, Nike does a great job of reminding us where they have come from, why they are who they are. And if you think about the Air Max 95 in 1995, and you think about what has happened since then, what the Air Max 95 did, in my opinion, was yes, it took a risk. But what it also did was tell everybody that Nike was so confident in the Air Max line that it was confident enough to take a risk. They did that, it worked out, and ever since then, we have received a lot more Air Max silhouettes, a lot more innovative technology, and what the Air Max line has done truly is stayed relevant and become a staple in a lot of people's collections, a lot of people's wardrobes, and honestly, still, the technological advancements that they have made, maybe they don't appeal to sneaker culture, but what they do appeal to is innovation and technology. And people are starting to think about them again for comfort and also for fashion in some way, but also for athletics. And to me, the Air Max 95 was an inflection point for Nike. They decided to go all in on something that they felt very confident in. And what ended up happening was making sure that Nike stayed relevant, the Air Max stayed relevant, and that Nike was able to continue to add on to that history. So I think if you're not familiar with the Air Max 95, this video is not going to go into in-depth detail. But as I thought about it from a historical standpoint, I thought about it from somebody who finally is able to get his hands on an OG colorway of this shoe, I undervalued it. I didn't realize that the Air Max 95 had so much history behind it and that it was so influential in getting us to where we are. One of the reasons why I do videos on this channel in the first place is because I think it's always important to look back at where you came from to truly understand where you are. And now, understanding the Air Max 95 just a little bit more, I now feel like I understand sneaker culture that much more. What do you think of the Air Max 95? What do you think of its place? And how do you feel about its legacy going forward? I hope this finds everybody well. I hope this finds everybody safe. And I'll talk to you next time.